Welcome to the podcast. Today I have an awesome guest. Thank you for coming, Kacie Scherler Abney. Is that right?
Close enough.
Say it for
Kacie Scherler Abney.
Kacie Scherler Abney. Now, Scherler Abney, what is the origins of that?
Well, my last name's Scherler. My husband's last name is Abney. So
okay. So you combine the two.
We did the combo thing.
Scherler Abney.
Yes.
Does he go by Scherler Abney as well?
He does.
Does he? That's kind of cool.
What a guy.
That's interesting. How did you guys talk about that and when you got married or beforehand?
Yeah, I didn't want to change my last name.
You liked it too much.
I did.
I
felt very attached.
Sure, yeah.
You know, why
we
did
grew
we
up
do
with
that?
it.
Right.
You wrote it in school every single
Yeah.
day. Yeah. So that's cool. That's a cool name too. It's a long name.
It is.
Scherler. What's the origins? Irish?
Swiss German.
Swiss German.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, that would be Scherler. Yeah. Is your husband German as well?
No.
No.
I'm not sure what his.
He's a mutt like me,
is.
probably.
Probably.
Yeah. So you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So how long have you been an entrepreneur?
Well, it depends what you consider to be an entrepreneurial endeavor. But I started
going into business for yourself, and even if you had a job, for working for somebody else, but you always maybe had a side hustle.
Side hustles,
yeah.
yes.
But that's still an entrepreneur.
I've been sort of the queen of side hustles.
For how long?
Probably for about 6 years.
Okay.
I was working at nonprofits after I graduated from college, living in the San Francisco Bay Area, paying way too much money for rent.
Oh, for sure.
Couldn't afford to live there on a nonprofit salary.
Yeah.
So started exploring with side hustles.
Yeah.
My main one was starting a salsa company.
Interesting.
Based on my granddad, who everyone refers to as Peepaw. It's his, longtime family recipe, and
you
it was
stole
a big hit.
You're like,
I stole it.
This is mine now, Grandpa.
Yes,
I'm going to make money on this.
And I did.
Yeah.
But I called it Peepaw Salsa.
Cool.
Yes.
And so what's your background? Is it marketing or what is?
Communications and marketing.
That helps.
Right.
So you had a one-up on a lot of people who start businesses and entrepreneurs.
I suppose, but I was also in the land of startups, and so everyone was trying to do their own thing.
And did you focus your startup there locally, or did you say, this is too oversaturated, try to go somewhere else?
I did start locally.
Okay. And did that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you have a lot of connections at that time?
I did, and the salsa business helped grow those connections, and I was part of a commercial kitchen with just a bunch of people who were doing similar things.
So there was just one kitchen, everybody kind of paid a monthly due, and they had jotted out times when they were going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, idea. So what happened to that? What happened to Peepaw's? Is it Peepaw?
Peepaw Salsa.
Peepaw Salsa.
Well, Peepaw opened a restaurant in Walters, Oklahoma, where we live now. So I handed that off to him.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So is the brand still going?
It is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And can you buy the salsa online?
You can buy it online. You can get it at the restaurant.
Awesome.
I don't do anything with it anymore.
You
but
just started and said,
it's going
"Here
strong.
You go, Pops."
Yes.
Awesome. And was he proud of that?
He was very excited.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because as older generations, they tend not to think that way, right? They're like, this is just something I do. But then as you get into it, they get more excited and like, okay.
Right.
Type of deal, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's
fun.
really cool. And so what other side hustles did you have going on?
Oh, goodness. Nothing too exciting. I did some freelance accounting for wealthy people in the area and just tried to sell myself with skills that I probably wasn't that equipped to do. But
well, no, that's part of entrepreneurship is selling yourself, right?
Yes.
So did you grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area or in Oklahoma?
So I grew up in Oklahoma on the farm. I moved to California to LA for school, where I studied the marketing and communications. Then I traveled for about a year just around the world, thought I wanted to live abroad and do something cool. And then I decided that I didn't.
Yeah. Why?
I think just culturally, it's hard to get plugged into a new place where you don't know anyone and
probably
things
takes
are
more than a
unfamiliar.
year or two, I'd imagine.
Right. And I expected on that trip to find my niche, and at no point did I really do that. And so when I moved back, I worked in the nonprofit sector, so still supporting a lot of international endeavors. I worked at Fair Trade Certified, so if you've ever seen the Fair Trade logo on chocolate or clothing, I got to do that, which was really cool. I felt like I was making an impact, but I wasn't being paid really for my time.
Doing a lot of work for nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then I decided to go back to grad school where I studied social entrepreneurship. So it's a business degree, but it's focused on doing a social good. And so that kind of helped me transition out.
2 birds, 1 stone.
Exactly. I had felt so stuck in the nonprofit world, and nonprofits can be really, really great, and they do a lot of great work, but they're very limiting. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Oftentimes they can't afford to pay employees, fairly and compensate them for their time. And so this felt like the perfect opportunity to bridge those two things. How can I make a difference, but also, be economically viable?
Let's talk nonprofit for a second.
Yeah.
Because I've often had issues with nonprofit. So, because I think that I've asked people this before. How many nonprofits do you think are in Wichita County alone?
Oh, I don't know.
Over 1,000.
Seriously?
Yes.
That's unreal.
It's amazing.
That's probably too many.
Yes. But what you tend to find is that there are often oversaturated nonprofits in every community.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that I think that there needs to be a general guideline to nonprofits. Like, what is the actual mission statement? And not just that, I think that there's several companies who do the same thing with very minuscule differences. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just personnel or whatever the case might be, but they can't seem to hey, let's combine this and have a greater impact.
Right.
So what are some of the struggles that you found with nonprofits?
Yeah, well, I think...
Because I'm a huge critic of them.
I am becoming one as well. That is a huge one. I think people really like the idea of starting nonprofits and not thinking through, well, who's already out there doing this work? Because more than likely somebody already is.
Almost guaranteed.
Yes. It's kind of like church denominations, if I'm allowed to say that. The
Absolutely.
minuscule differences.
No, the other podcast I do, we talk about Christian stuff and church and all that. And I've actually brought that criticism up in that because you have multiple different denominations like feeding the homeless and stuff like that. And it's like, well, why don't you combine? There's just a lot of I would say interagency, if you use a political term, and it's just there's so minuscule differences. It's like, why are we doing that?
Right.
So I'm very frustrated. I think that there should be no nonprofits because I think when things are for profit, there's more accountability there.
Yes, absolutely. And more transparency. So that's the other problem with nonprofits. We often give our money to them expecting that it's all going to the cause.
Right.
But nonprofits have insanely high overhead costs.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not telling you that oftentimes.
Well, you look at politicians like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Clinton Foundation, all these different, all it is really a funnel to keep their money in a lot of ways. I just think that the whole thing is there's a lot of people who claim to do things for the greater good, and that's not really their motivating factors. But
yeah, well, oftentimes I think it starts out as their motivating factor, but then they get kind of lost along the way. And it becomes more selfish. Yeah,
and I think there should be, I talk about that too, is you have to surround yourself I try to surround myself with people, friends who hold me accountable, because anybody, I don't care who you are, they can go down a path that's you just get sucked in, and it's small little things until you find yourself, how did I get here? But if you surround yourself with people who are like, hey, where are you going with this? And then you have to stop and reassess. I think that's important.
Definitely.
And maybe a lot of those nonprofits don't put those stop gates in place. And you would see that as work. I've worked in nonprofits a lot as well, more in the religious church sector, but you in the business world. So do you see a lot of that? There's not maybe the checks and balances that there should be
in nonprofits.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's two-sided. There is so much bureaucracy sometimes that nonprofits can't do the work that they actually want to do because there's so many hurdles. And then on the flip side, because nonprofits don't have the same checks and balances as for-profit companies, they get away with a lot more and don't have to communicate that. But they're not all bad.
No, I agree. They're not all bad.
And we do, my husband, Zach, and I, we both still work for a nonprofit based in Uganda. He actually grew up there in Uganda.
Your husband did?
He did.
That's awesome. We'll get into that.
Yeah, but we still are affiliated with them. They do really awesome work. They're one of the few organizations that I've seen who do it right. Yeah. And that's given me a lot of hope.
Well, and I think, too, to segue into that, I think that I do support nonprofits as well, but I tend to do them in other countries, not in this one.
Yes.
Because it's you have to stop and think. Our government is pretty much a catch-all for all social causes. I mean, I don't know of any issue that doesn't have a program for it. But you have other countries with way less fortunate people. I mean, there's people who are literally walking 5 miles for water every single day. I would say, okay, let's put that to the top of the list. You know what I mean? And so I think that for me, as probably you, I think that's where I funnel my giving towards as well. But there are some great ones out there for like that.
Definitely.
So your husband, how'd you meet your husband?
So we were both working he grew up in Uganda, and then his family moved to Portland, Oregon. But his parents, while they were in Uganda, started this organization that we now.
And why were they there?
They went originally as missionaries to church plant. And then, like you mentioned, they noticed that people had much more dire physical needs, and you can't really meet someone's spiritual needs without meeting their physical needs. I say
it all the time. All the time.
Yes.
Yes.
And so they sort of shifted their focus to, alleviating poverty, providing clean water, economic empowerment. And since then, the nonprofit has sort of grown into this organization that is 100% locally led. So that's another thing that we're very passionate about is oftentimes as Westerners, we want to go into a different country and implement our Western solutions of what we think.
Which does not translate.
It doesn't. No, culturally, it just doesn't.
And that's okay. That's the thing. People need to understand that you can meet somebody's needs and not have to give them your Western doctrine as well.
Yes. But it takes a lot of humility on our part.
Like, they don't need Netflix.
Right.
They just need water right now.
Right. And even providing clean water. So there are many organizations who provide clean water, who build wells, but oftentimes those organizations don't realize that, those wells can break within 3 months. They didn't train anyone who lives in the village to fix it. They didn't know that, in these villages in Africa, especially where there are Christians and Muslims, oftentimes there's there's conflict. So did you put the well on the Christian side or the Muslim side? Because they might not share the water with each other.
Or maybe put one on each side so that there is no conflict.
Right. But you have to, so our staff, we go into the villages and we spend years with them just learning the ins and outs of their community, their conflict, their culture, while we're giving them water, while we're providing them the tools to lift themselves out of poverty.
How often do you go to Uganda?
So typically we would go once or twice a year. Obviously, with the pandemic, we haven't been since 2019.
Sure. But I'm sure there's people on the ground that you keep in contact with.
Yeah. So we have a staff of 30 Ugandans, and they're still out there in the villages every day.
I bet you're looking forward to getting back there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you met through a nonprofit, your husband and yourself?
Well, I was working for a different nonprofit based in Uganda at the time, but I was in San Francisco. And he just found me on Instagram.
Oh, wow.
Slid into my DMs.
Oh, wow. A real social meeting on a social media platform.
Yes.
And he said, hey, I'm in Uganda.
Yeah. And then 10 months later, we were married.
Awesome. That's a cool story, though. How long have you been married?
We've been married for 3 years in October.
Awesome.
So
that's awesome.
Coming up on 3.
So, you and your husband, you do farming, correct? And ranching.
We do now. Yes. So when we got married, we had purchased an Airstream with the goal of actually traveling around and traveling for fun and also fundraising for this nonprofit. I had been ready to get out of the Bay Area, but about
I would imagine.
Yes.
It's even worse now.
Yes.
Yeah.
But about a month after we got married, I got very sick. I lost feeling in my lower body. I basically woke up one morning and couldn't walk, and we had no idea what was going on. And, we ended up going to the Mayo Clinic, and they diagnosed me with a very rare demyelinating disease. It's similar to multiple sclerosis, but
is it the one in Rochester? Okay.
Yeah. But the disease is called MOG. I can't tell you what that stands for. It's very long and scientific. Sure. But basically there are lesions in my spinal cord, and they put me on treatment and gave me a 30% chance of recovery, which was devastating at the time. I've always been super active, and we had just been married, and it seems like things are going.
That's a hard blow in first getting married.
Yeah, it was very brutal. We did not have any sort of honeymoon phase. But thankfully, my parents had sort of a fixer-upper house on the farm, so we moved in there. We never planned on starting the farm, but I had done research on a diet. It's called the autoimmune protocol. And basically the bulk of the diet is really clean proteins.
So MOG, is that considered an autoimmune disease?
It is.
Okay.
Yes. And so we couldn't source the meat that I needed for this diet. So we thought, let's just
raise it
ourselves.
Awesome.
And now it's sort of blossomed into our life.
Yeah. Taking good out of a bad situation.
Yes.
Which, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to oftentimes do.
Definitely.
You have to find the good in all the bad, even if in more than even just the learning experience, but also just, okay, let's see what can come out of that. So I would imagine that probably you can go one or two ways. The stress of something like that can really have an impact on a relationship, but it can also have the opposite, where it just kind of emboldens you. So I would imagine your guys' relationship even got stronger.
Yeah, it was definitely hard in the beginning.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what the future would hold. I mean, we had occupational therapists coming to retrofit our house for a handicapped person, and that's very jarring for both of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, we've been married almost 3 years, but it's felt like 10 just because of our life circumstances.
Well, and stress can do that.
Yeah.
Right. And then starting a business, that's adding more stress to a complicated situation. But what made you guys decide to do that? Yeah.
As we were growing food for ourselves, we just started to get more demand from people in the area who not only wanted clean meat, but wanted to know their farmer and where their meat came from. And so that's when we got plugged into the farmer's market here in Wichita Falls. We're now plugged into the farmer's market in Oklahoma City. We have a small but mighty following on Instagram, and we love to talk about regenerative farming. That's what we do. The priority in the beginning was my health, but now our priority is the soil health.
Sure.
So everything we do for the land. The meat that we sell is just sort of a byproduct of that.
And so are you guys leasing land, bought land, both?
We lease land from my family.
Okay.
They do conventional farming in Walters, cattle, wheat, cotton, soybeans.
Is there because traditional people, if they're not familiar, traditional farming and ranching is completely different than, say, what you guys are doing.
Yes.
And I mean, I had a friend, they own like 3,500 acres up in Montana, and him and I would often talk. You can almost make just as much money on 100 to 200 acres as you can on 3,000 acres, just depending upon how you're structuring your business and what it is you're doing.
Absolutely.
But oftentimes what you're seeing in the farming community and ranching is a lot of kids aren't wanting to take over the family business or the farm, and so you're seeing corporations buy farms and things like that. So there's, not to go on a tangent, but there's this huge occurrence happening that people are unaware of, this shift that's taking place at corporations. I mean, Bill Gates, it's been all over the news the last few months that he's the largest farm owner in the country now, and things like that.
We lament that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's super unfortunate that, you don't have people taking over the family farm or even restructuring it. So is there like a butting of heads of traditional versus you? Does your family, are they supportive of what you're doing? Or
So thankfully my family's been very supportive. I think if we were a part of a different family unit, that might not be the case. But I think it could be viewed as competition, but it's not.
No, it's not competition at all. They're two different markets.
Exactly. And my dad especially has been very generous with us. I do think people both in my family and surrounding farmers have seen us more as an experiment, like this hippy-dippy thing.
Yeah.
We'll see what they do. But and
that's fair.
It is.
Because they've been there for 100 years. I mean.
Right.
And I think that's something that's often happened, is that there's this animosity sometimes between opposing people, ideals and something like that, instead of on both sides. Like the traditional farming is like, oh, you can't do it this way, and then like your hippy dippy people are like, they don't show the respect to the people who've been there for 100 years either.
Right.
So I think there has to be a balance between both parties.
Definitely. And we communicate all the time that we never fault traditional or conventional farmers for the practices they use, because they are a product of their environment,
Sure.
a product of government subsidies and structures that have been set in
and
place.
those things have been taking, it's not like it was a switch. It's like slow trickles over the course of 6-7 decades.
Right.
They didn't just end up where they're at. It was slow, methodical. Like you come in the 70s, you have this crisis. Well, what are you going to do? We're going to lose it all if we don't do this.
Yeah.
So that it gets you going down that road that you never intended. I think a lot of farmers and ranchers are in positions that they never intended or wanted to be in, but through circumstances of decades, that's what's happened.
Definitely. And we try to think of ourselves as just an experiment. So we have proven in the last 3 years that we have greatly increased the health of our soil that we run cattle on. We have the NRCS coming out to take soil samples and really monitor what we're doing. And we have proven that what we're doing is economically viable. And so our hope is that as this happens and as we continue to learn more about the ways traditional farming is actually harming our planet and harming our health,
Yes.
agrochemicals, for example.
Absolutely.
The science is there, but what do we need to do now to transition away from that?
Well, I will also say, in researching it myself, is that some of the science is not there because a lot of these things are so new that we don't know the long-term effects.
Correct.
So they say the science is there, but if you go back and look at some of the science in support of what Big Pharma is doing, well, a lot of those studies are flawed, and a lot of times they're hiring quote-unquote third parties that represent the pharma instead of the average consumer. So, we can go down that rabbit hole too, but I think Europe has done a lot better job in stopping that. I think we've done a horrendous job, and I think that goes along not just in the farming industry, but big pharma and all these other different things. So
yes,
and people don't realize that big pharma and oftentimes farming are linked, because big pharma often does like chemicals and things like that too. Sometimes, they have subdivisions and whatnot. But how do you clean up the soil?
Yeah, so a lot of the practices that we use are based on traditional indigenous ecological knowledge. So if you think about when bison roamed the Great Plains, they were constantly moving, and so they weren't eating grass all the way to the root. Right. Like farmers these days let the cattle out, they eat it down to the ground, basically killing the plant species.
The root, which is where all the nutrients are.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we move our cattle several times a day to fresh pasture. And the metaphor I like to use is it's like getting your hair trimmed. It's very healthy for the health and growth of your hair to get it trimmed. It actually grows faster. Same with the grass. If you let the cattle just mow the tops of it, it actually grows back taller. The root systems grow deeper. So our pastures where we run our cattle have become much more lush than they were even when no livestock was on them. We're seeing a reintroduction of native plant species that haven't grown there in several years.
That's interesting.
Better water retention in the soil.
Absolutely.
Less erosion, runoff, more pollinators.
Is your
insects.
father, does he see these changes taking place?
Yes.
What does he think about that?
I think he's really encouraged by it.
And so you guys do rotational grazing. What is that, like 50-acre plot, 20 smaller?
I think we run about 450 acres, but we do small paddocks at a time.
Yeah. So what is your rotation, like every week until you go to the new start, or longer?
So they get moved to a fresh paddock 2 to 3 times a day.
Okay. So, but let's say they start on one.
Oh, and how long?
Yeah, what's that rotational cycle?
It depends on the season. My husband would be able to better answer this question, but I think it can be maybe anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 months.
Oh, wow, that much.
Mm-hmm.
So how many, so do you guys just run cattle, or are you guys running pork, or are you guys running chickens?
We do pastured pigs and chickens as well. Mm-hmm.
And you guys do like the tractor trailers with the chickens, or? We
did initially. We don't process chickens anymore. We just have laying hens.
Work, huh?
It is a lot of work.
Yeah, I go in. If you go into Sam's Club and Costco, that is a one-off, because for them to sell like these little chickens for $4, it's like I don't even know how they do that.
Yeah.
You know, but that's your competition in a sense, right?
Right.
If people don't care about where their meat's coming from.
Yeah.
Our family's made that transition probably 10 years ago to better meats and stuff like that. But like you were saying earlier, you can't fault people because there's a lot of people because it is more of a cost, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do have to make sacrifices in other parts of your budget to maybe accommodate that. And for people on fixed budgets and things like that, sometimes that's not. But what I like about people like yourself and your husband, what you're doing, if we got more of those costs would come down.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I think even if that was at like 30 to 40% market versus, what is it now? 10? Maybe, yeah. If you're lucky. And probably in parts of the country, it's more than others, right?
Yeah. I mean, the laws also make it difficult. Chicken processing, especially in Oklahoma and Texas.
Well, just in meat in general, how does that work for you guys in the laws versus going up against larger, like the traditional?
Yeah. Thankfully, with the beef and pork, it's been pretty easy. We do have to have everything processed at a USDA federally inspected processing plant, which we do down in Munster, Texas. Mm-hmm. Our product is still slightly more expensive, though it's not that much more than a grass-fed and finished ground beef at Walmart. But a lot more work is going into our animals. Well,
and I think people, like I made the transition probably 3 or 4 years ago to try really, really hard to buy American as well.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do.
It is.
People don't realize. I mean, that's really hard. And I mean, I still consume from Amazon. I mean, I get Amazon packages all the time. But at the same time, it's just like if you try to, on certain things, I tried to do that. And even with meat and all that, it takes more work and more time.
Yes.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys use a processing facility. And if people don't understand, processing facilities have to have a USDA inspector there, correct?
For us, if we want to sell across state lines, which we have chosen to do. Uh-huh.
You sell in Texas, but your farm is based in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are the greatest challenges you've faced in that?
With processing?
Well, just with starting this track of growing your own meat.
Yeah. I think it's just been a huge learning curve. People really like to idealize having a farm and having farm animals. But I think our biggest challenge has been, okay, if we want to do what we say that we do, which is being regenerative, which is beyond sustainable, like we don't just want to sustain the health of the soil, we want to regenerate it. It takes a lot more work than just letting your animals out, which, again, no shame on people who just let their animals out.
Yeah.
But we really are striving to be different, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's really hard being in this area where people aren't necessarily as familiar yet with why we need to be eating clean meat or clean food in general. I want to hope that we're getting there, but there's a lot of education that has to go in when we're talking to our customers as well. And something that we've sort of adopted is just, okay, there are several things the customer might be interested in, whether that's eating clean, whether that's having American raised beef or knowing their farmer. Normally somebody will really kind of spark up with one aspect of what we do. So how do we find that in the 2 minutes that we have with a customer and really connect with them on that level?
Yeah. So what have you focused on in your marketing strategies as a marketer?
Yeah, I think initially it was really on the regenerative side, but we've kind of learned, people here aren't there yet. So let's promote the local farmer. Yeah. Let's promote you putting a face and a name to where your meat product comes from. Let's bring people to the farm, actually see the animals, see what we do.
So you're going to start doing tours?
We do some tours, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So as a business owner, an entrepreneur, you do have to learn to pivot. Like you were just basically explaining a pivot. Like you're focusing on regenerative, you're noticing it's not catching on to the local populace. So now you have to pivot to, hey, support your local farmer, right? I think that's a constant. Like you're trying to constantly pivot to reach your audience so that you're trying to make a connection. That's really what marketing is. Is you're trying to make a connection with somebody so they can say, hey, I'm into that. Which just in listening to your story, I'm into it just because now I have some background and I see, you and your husband and what it is, your health story and things like that. So there's a connection, and maybe other people are going through something similar in their health because this is beneficial. Eating clean and healthy is beneficial to all people.
Right.
That's one of the most frustrating things. I had listened to one of the Joe Rogan podcasts, and he was saying, and I completely concur, is like through all this COVID madness, they still don't promote exercise and eating right.
Yep.
And it's like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that a lot of this is I am so disheartened with our public education system. Like, I don't know why this type of stuff isn't being taught, why just the basics of life, like eating right, and taking care of your body, the importance of that, the longevity showing, things like that. But in dealing with the growth and like whenever you're starting something, it seems like that takes the most time because you're learning, right? As you guys go along,
Mm-hmm.
you guys probably you said you started out butchering chickens and you're like, this isn't for us, right? So some of those mistakes, what do you guys have like a goal, like a 3-year, 5-year? Do you guys like say, okay, this is where we're trying to be, or is it kind of by ear?
Yeah, I mean, we would love to scale up. There are people doing what we're doing with cattle, with several thousand head of cattle, and if we can, I mean, land is the biggest issue. We
Right.
don't own land. We've sort of maxed out our capacity
Right.
to lease from my family, and so we're looking right now. But that's just challenges that all
Sure.
farmers are facing.
Sure, and a lot of it's so interesting in looking at that dichotomy is like they don't want to sell their land, and if people do want to sell their land, it's more than what is realistic to purchase it.
Right.
In a lot of ways, it's like if you run the numbers, it's like this is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when because in your guys' situation, you're going to take that land and improve upon it through regeneration, and that's going to take years.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're to try to get that across to somebody that is selling land is probably pretty hard to do.
It is. And something that we're focusing on right now is finding people who own land who aren't necessarily interested in selling, but if we can lease from them and improve their land quality, it's beneficial for them in multiple ways.
Yeah.
They're profiting from the lease. They're profiting because we're increasing the value of their land. So that's sort of a separate marketing endeavor we're working on right now.
You're working out the kinks on that.
Yes.
I bet that's pretty frustrating, though. It can be.
It is.
What is your and your husband's greatest frustration
Oh, goodness.
in dealing with this?
On the marketing side, or just the farm
in general, that
in
you guys are like, oh God, why?
I think with farming expenses are so high, and oftentimes margins can be so low, and oftentimes your profit you don't see for a year or two. If you look at the life cycle of a calf, our calves, because they're grass fed and finished, take 24 months to be processed, and that's a long time when
Yes.
you're buying all of these cattle up front, and then you're just waiting for your return on that investment. So,
And do you guys try to increase how many calves you buy year over year?
yes. So again, it's sort of a constant buying and selling process. We found that in the interim, if we can just breed some to sell to other people looking to get into the industry, that sort of offsets some of that waiting time.
It's like a snowball effect. Like you have to, like you're really not going to see your true profit and margin of profit for probably 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Since you're basically just the profit you take is just enough to live and just to expand. I'm assuming that you guys take a lot of your profit just to and then regenerate it into the business
Correct.
for that eventuality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine so. That's probably pretty frustrating.
It's frustrating. And the landscape is just always changing. Thankfully, we don't supplement any feed for our cattle, but our pork, we do a non-GMO corn and soy free, and this isn't cheap.
That's hard to find.
Very hard to find, especially with the pandemic. Prices have skyrocketed. And so we don't want to raise our pork or beef prices. We want to keep our product as accessible as possible.
But you have to. Everybody is. Even just the general, goods across the board are going up.
Yeah, but it's just hard. It's hard to do that to our loyal customers
Sure.
too, and oftentimes they don't understand. And so really wrestling with that.
So have you thought about or using like video, like a 2-minute this is where we're at, or like this is how the process works. I mean, I know that there's a lot of companies or educational platforms that use like the 2-minute cartoon clips and realistic so they could see. And I hate to say it's like dumbing down, but you almost have to for people because we're inundated with so much information so often that you just need a simple graph that's like, okay, this is where it was, but this is where it has to be, and this is the reason why.
Yes.
Do you, as a marketer, do you try to come up with that, or is it that you guys just have no time to do all this stuff?
Well, you are a serial entrepreneur yourself, so you understand the struggle when you've sort of spread yourself so thin. We do kind of feel that right now. I think another challenge too is that we're living in this every day, and so a lot of it just becomes second place, and we don't think critically about our audience and how much they know about us or might not know about us. And so really, as a marketer, what you need to be doing is coming into it with fresh eyes every single day.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, we've got new people here. I might have shared this a year ago or 6 months ago, but it's time for me to recycle that and share it again in an even more creative and engaging way. But it can get hard as a marketer when you're sort of doing the same thing every day to think about it through that lens, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Now, do you, you started a storefront, and it's relatively new. How has the reception been to that?
A lot better than I expected.
That's good. So, but once again, that stretches you, right?
Yes.
As a person.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So sort of as an extension of the farm in the way that my husband and I try to live our lives, which is very, I guess, local and decentralized. You know, we also use Amazon, but we like not to.
Sure. It's becoming harder and harder not to.
It's very difficult not to. And also just becoming more aware of all of the environmental toxins we're exposed to. I mean, because of my autoimmune issues, I feel much more cognizant of what's in my shampoo, what's in my soap. And so we decided to start a waste-free store to help people both eliminate plastic and just have access to clean products for their household. So you can bring your own container, you can refill with detergents, shampoos, soaps, herbs, spices, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, just giving people the opportunity to lower their environmental footprint and also their environmental toxic load in their household. And again, our community, which we love living in this area, we love the people in this area. It's just not quite trendy in the way that it might be elsewhere to.
Well, and I think too, that is geographical in a lot of ways. Like, for instance, San Francisco, they've been on that trend. It's not like a relatively new thing.
Right.
They've been doing that since like the 70s. Like the hippie movement really took it, Berkeley and all that. They took a foothold there, and it's really never let off in that sense that they're very more economic or, you know, ecological, more friendly and things like that. So, yeah, it's hard. I mean, you're in Texas too, you know, where I think that there's some bastions. And what's unfortunate, like, I would consider myself a conservative. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that has become politicized where, like, and I don't know why, but it has. And I honestly don't get it, because it's like everybody, whether you're liberal or conservative or whatever the case might be, you should all want clean food.
Yes.
You should all want to try to do what you can for the environment. And I mean, so there's a lot of things that have become politicized, which I don't think necessarily need to be.
Right.
And I think both sides have done a disservice to that mindset.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
I think all blame could be cast equally. But as a conservative, I mean, I think the same thing. I think I want good food for especially I have kids, you know, and I'm going to have grandkids one day. I want to start something that they can hopefully continue on with.
Absolutely.
That mindset. Mindset is a big thing. So what are your marketing strategies to try to educate the people within your geographical location?
Yeah, again, I mean, we just opened 3 months ago. And so it's still very much a learning experience for me to know how to communicate our mission. Much like the farm, how do we communicate it in a way that connects with people? To your last point, bridging the gap between this polarity that we have in our culture is something Zach and I are both very passionate about, and we just want the work that we do to really be a bridge builder, because at the end of the day, we should share these values
Yes.
of wanting to care for our families, provide.
And your local business and farmer. I mean, really.
Supporting local. I don't think anyone loves going to Walmart where they put one item in a plastic bag. I don't know why we're still doing that. But
Sure.
will Texas ever ban plastic bags? Probably not. But yeah, just right now, I've been very lucky to have a lot of sort of free advertising generated through the local newspaper and local news. And that's another thing that you can really only find in a smaller community. So that's been really nice. But experimenting with social media strategy is something that I'm doing. But again, this feels like a huge learning curve for me to know how to connect this store to people here.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing how you break through that. I think you will. I can only share like my personal. I had a pastor once say that, your testimony is your testimony. Like nobody can take that away. Like people can rail against it. People could come against it, but it doesn't matter because it was your life. You lived it. It's real. And I think part of that, like one of the connection I just felt is just knowing a little bit about your story. I mean, your story is the connection that people are going to connect to, because we are, that's how we are as humans. We connect to people. And so I think your story in and of itself is going to be a huge connecting power, because there's a lot of people who are suffering from diseases and like diabetes and autoimmune diseases and poor health and things like that they can say, hey, this is how they started down this path. I can relate to that, And so I don't know, take that for what it's worth.
That's encouraging.
But it did for me, just even hearing that just a few minutes ago. Because I have family that have autoimmune diseases and things like that. We've talked about and broached these subjects before and implemented some changes as you have, and we've found success in that. So that's confirmation too. How often do you share your story with people, and do you see that it tends to translate?
Yeah, I think initially with the farm, it was really our raison d'etre. I'm not sure if you say that correctly, but that was our reason for being, and I shared my story a lot. And then as the person sharing the story, it can kind of feel like it starts to get old, and people have heard this before and they're tired of hearing about it. With the store, I haven't really made it personal yet. And so it's encouraging to hear you say that. Maybe that's an angle that I need to take.
I absolutely do think you need to.
Yeah.
Because we need to connect to people. That's what really matters.
Definitely. And the other thing too is just, I think the biggest battle that I'll face with this store is just the convenience factor. It's not convenient to bring your own container, to drive downtown, especially if you don't live there, to refill a product. And so maybe it is that personal connection that will give a person the extra push to come in the door. I'll have to try it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some ideas there.
Yeah.
You'll have to flush them out. But how's your health been?
It's been really good.
Good.
Yeah.
And so you implemented all clean meats. And are you like familiar with the carnivore diet? So like Jordan Peterson and like his daughter Michaela Peterson, that's like what she solely does, right? Because she had some autoimmune diseases that she was battling with, from what I understand, and like she's doing great now. What is your strategy for like diet and things like that?
Yeah. So the autoimmune diet, again, mostly clean meats, some vegetables. I don't know if I could do the full-on carnivore diet, but no gluten, dairy, sugar.
Just zero. So you have like no cheat days.
I do not cheat.
You're not like, I got to have this cookie.
No, slowly you can reintroduce foods. So I can't have nuts or seeds on my diet.
Okay.
Which is a really good source of protein and iron.
Was that a hard
meat.
transition?
It was very hard, but when you're basically paralyzed, you know you'll do anything.
Sure. Like you had no movement in the waist.
I could stand, so I still had some muscle strength, but I couldn't like walk.
Was it like you had no nerve
feeling.
damage?
Correct. It's all nerve damage.
I mean, I can relate to that because I had no feeling in one of my left legs for a year.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I got hit by a drunk driver. So I have 2 rods, 11 screws in my back.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like that far from being paralyzed from waist down. But so I understand what that feels like. It was just like, it's like a numbing. Did you even feel the numbing sensation or?
Numb.
I mean, I had the needles type in my leg. So, and it's a terrible feeling. It's hard to it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
But did you just wake up one day like that, or was it like, did you feel like something was changing over your body over a week or two?
It was over a few weeks, and at first I thought it was sciatic nerve damage or something, and that's what my doctor said it was, and then it slowly got worse. But then, I mean, yeah, it was overnight that the feeling was gone.
How many false diagnoses did you get?
Oh my goodness, so many, and I was not believed for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I have more mild.
Is that frustrating?
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. People don't realize that false diagnoses are huge in this country.
And just doctors not listening. I had more mild autoimmune issues before, and autoimmune is, the people are silent sufferers, I think they're referred to, because so oftentimes our symptoms are not seen by other people, and so it's hard to believe someone if they say, well, I have brain fog or fatigue or exhaustion or whatever else. But then, it took me not being able to walk for them to finally be like, okay.
And oftentimes, too, people could have the exact same autoimmune disease and have different effects. Our bodies are uniquely different.
Yeah.
And everybody responds differently. That's one of the, with the vaccines and stuff, not everybody's going to respond the same, even with COVID, not everybody's going to respond the same. So it seems to be like a broad brush that's painted within America of, the medical industry, like just, they often call it, you've heard the term, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, because they're so rare. But through diet or through the food toxins and the things that I think there's becoming more and more zebras than people realize. And I think there's a shift that's occurring in the country that I think we need more like alternative doctors and things like that to start chasing down those things.
Yes.
Than the broad brush that's being applied. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And we need to, obviously, conventional medicine has its place.
Absolutely.
It provides a lot of healing and relief for people, but it should not be the only form of treatment that we look at.
Yeah, we need to focus on diet and exercise.
And just boosting our immune systems and taking vitamin D in the winter. I mean, there are such simple things we can be doing to better our health.
So you're doing better. So what's your diet look like? Do you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, just lunch, dinner?
I eat all day.
Yeah, just throughout the day?
I eat a lot of meat. Start the day with quite a bit of bacon.
Yeah. You can never go wrong with bacon.
Yes.
Now, can you have spices like salt and pepper? Or
I can do basically salt, garlic, onion, thyme are my main ones, which it gives me a good...
Salt and pepper is all I
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes garlic is great.
Yeah.
No fruits?
I can do fruits occasionally.
Even if it's organic fruits and vegetables, it's just not something that... Is it just because it breaks down into sugars and those sugars
the glycemic index. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And does your husband follow a lot of this diet to help you out, or does he like sneak off and eat
cookies? He definitely sneaks and eats whole boxes of Oreos, but he won't do it in front of me. But he is a very good cook, and so he does most of the cooking in the household, which is all on my diet. I feel very grateful to him for adopting it with me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what you do in a marriage. I mean, if you want it to work, you have to. It's a give and take. That's just reality. So what? So you're growing your herd exponentially over time, trying to find land to buy. Those are your big hurdles right now.
They are.
Yeah.
That's a hurdle. We're thinking about.
Do you have farm hands or anything like that, or is it just you and your husband?
It's just us.
Yeah. Long days.
For him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does he? He's not here, but does he ever just like, this sucks, I hate it?
Yes, occasionally.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's very life-giving for him. I mean, I grew up on the farm and I couldn't wait to leave.
He didn't.
He did not.
So is this all like what?
Super novel to him, sort of a cross-cultural experience.
I've met him. He's a smart tack though. He picks up things quick though.
Yeah, he's a good egg. But He loves it for now. If it's what we'll do forever, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing anything else right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
And do you guys ever, people don't realize that with farming and ranching, your guys is like vacations, if you can take them, are like typically in the winter, right?
Yeah. Vacations are hard. I tend to take vacations for the both of us, and
Yeah.
he stays home.
You're posting on Instagram, hey,
Yes.
having a great time with that.
Yes, but we're hopeful we can get to a place where we could leave the farm for a few days, or
Sure.
hire an intern, or
Yeah.
something. Those are
Have
other
you
goals of ours.
have you thought about that? About maybe like doing like a school type of thing where you could actually have some labor and teach some practices and things like that?
Yeah, we'd love that. I mean, we did have a temporary intern over the last Christmas break, a girl from Oklahoma State, and we loved having her. That was pretty short term. I think to really have an impact and teach someone, they'd need to be there for a few months, and that's quite the commitment. We live pretty remotely.
Sure, and it'd be something that would be their interest, that they would want to do for their life too.
Mm-hmm.
That they could come in. Knowledge, people don't realize. I don't think enough that knowledge in and of itself is such a huge value. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
you're not just giving your labor for nothing. You're giving your labor for knowledge, and it's almost becoming like this lost art idea.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So,
Well, and they could live in a really cool Airstream, and we'd feed them really good food.
good meat.
If there's
Lots
anyone
of bacon.
listening. Yeah.
So we covered a lot, more than I anticipated. You kind of surprised me with some of the stuff that you went
It's
down.
very complex. That's another reason I don't bring it up enough, is it's hard to explain it all.
No, but it's important.
Yeah.
And to find a way to like streamline that, your story, so that it can reach more audiences, because of the attention span is like 2 minutes. That's your challenge that you're gonna have to figure out. But I mean, I gained a ton of insight just to your guys' backstory and stuff like that. It makes a lot more sense. And oftentimes we do what we do because there is a backstory to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think you guys are doing awesome. I'm so glad I had you on. Did you have any questions or anything that you wanted to add to this?
Oh, well, I think to a point you made earlier about sort of making lemonade out of lemons, you know, whenever I got sick, it felt like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But none of this would have happened had that not happened. And so just...
And have you met people who had similar stories to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks to social media.
Yeah. It connects the world.
Definitely. Yeah.
And have they picked up what, like, your diet and stuff like that, and seen changes in their life as well?
Yeah, a few people have. It's a really hard diet to follow.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do it. I'd be like...
Yeah, especially if you have kids. I mean, it'd be near impossible, but I do share about it a lot in hopes that people try.
You don't have children?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
So are you going to, when you have children, are you going to raise them with this diet in a sense, or just like an offshoot of it?
Maybe an offshoot.
Yeah.
You got to get some animal crackers and
Yeah.
goldfish in there.
Make your own or something
Right,
like that.
right.
I don't know. Stretch you even more.
Yes.
So I really appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome having you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. I'll have you guys on again, and we'll track your progress, and we'll put the link to your website and stuff like that down on the video. And thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right.